Anybody who knows me knows I love Christopher Nolan, maybe a little bit too much. He's my personal favorite director of all time, and he really is the guy that pushed me to pursue filmmaking as a future career. Not to mention he's got some decent films under his belt, to say the least. So naturally, I'm not only willing to, but will continue to sacrifice time that I could be using for good deeds, family, women, friends, to watch a Christopher Nolan movie. Dude, if you gave me the choice between watching Insomnia for the first time and saving an orphan from a burning building, I'm sorry. However, last night that movie was Dunkirk. Dunkirk released in 2007 on, guess what date? July 21st. What it is with Christopher Nolan and that date, I don't know. I'm not even sure he knows. Maybe it's like the day that he first watched 2001: A Space Odyssey because he's a friggin' nerd. But due to my obsession with Nolan's films, I had extremely high hopes for this one, and I'm extremely happy to say that it did not disappoint in the slightest. Despite the fact that pretty much all of Nolan's films are extremely different in premise, other than the Batman trilogy, every single one of his films always seems to have this certain feel to it. It always feels like Nolan. For example, despite the fact that Interstellar and Memento are so similar, somebody who's seen a Nolan film, like let's say somebody who's seen Inception, can watch both of those films back to back without knowing who the director is and be like, oh yeah, that's a Nolan film. Dunkirk is probably one of Nolan's more bland movie premises, and that's not a jab at all, it just is what it is. It's a war movie. There's nothing with like time or freaking time inversion or whatever. Nolan and time, what is it with that? He loves time a lot. And Dunkirk doesn't have any of that. But despite the fact that it is his most bland movie premise, he still manages to fit a ton of Nolan staples into the film, a lot of which I expected and some of which I did not expect at all. For one, Nolan always seems to put a monologue at the end of his films, which is just a bunch of shots over a character talking, and usually those shots are of the characters after the story's over, kind of being like a where are they now? And it always has like that super melodramatic music like time is an illusion. We are all real. But are we? No. Pets United is the best film of 2019. It's like it's always something like that, and Dunkirk Dunkirk has that. So of course he had Fionn Whitehead read a newspaper to Harry Styles while on a train. If you didn't see that one coming, get with the times. Honestly, I thought the ending monologue was great. I thought that it did a really good job of wrapping up the story, and it didn't really feel the need to tell us stuff we already knew. Another thing that Nolan is known for is non-linear narratives. I mean, you got Memento, Oppenheimer, The Prestige, Following. I mean, Nolan and non-linear narratives is a match almost as iconic as Quentin Tarantino and feet. I'll admit in the beginning I was very confused as to why the story was non-linear, but by a certain point I saw a character that was less shivering, we'll say, than he had previously been shown, and I was like, oh, okay, that's why, and it all made sense. And while I do think it was the right decision to make the story non-linear, I will warn you, it did take a little bit for it to click with me as to why it was non-linear, and I was kind of worried that it wasn't gonna justify being non-linear, but it did eventually. Hoyte van Hoytema how do you pronounce Hoyte van Hoytema? That's a tongue twister. Hoytema returns from Interstellar as Dunkirk cinematographer, and because of that, there's actually quite a lot of filming similarities. You see a lot of those like mirror shots where it's like the camera is made to look like it's attached to the vehicle as if it's the rear view mirror. In Interstellar, it was the truck shot, and in Dunkirk, they use it for the fighter jets. I still do personally prefer the way that Interstellar used it, just in the context of the scene. It was more emotional. It was kind of meant to represent Cooper looking back without actually looking back. Not to mention it actually gave two different angles to one scene, and it didn't feel the need to get like all close up on the girl crying, and it just saw her like waving from. It was pretty emotionally impactful. Dunkirk doesn't have any of that, but it does use it in very tense ways, specifically whenever a fighter jet is being chased. And while it is cool, it just doesn't have the same emotional impact that Interstellar's use of the shot has. Moving on from that, I mean, of course, Lee Smith edited it. I mean, that man has pretty much edited like 70% of Nolan's filmography, and I would argue that this is his best work with Nolan. And just to be clear, Lee Smith did not edit Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer is my favorite edited of Christopher Nolan's films, but of the ones that Lee Smith did, this is definitely my favorite. It's quick and snappy during intense scenes, and it doesn't cut much at all during peaceful scenes, and moreover, I just think he really knows how to arrange the shots to build tension. Overall, I mean, Hoytema and Lee's editing and cinematography match, it worked great in Interstellar, and it worked really well here, it just works differently than it did in Interstellar. Interstellar was all about immersion and serenity, while Dunkirk was all about intensity. Interstellar shots are much longer and more static with very few cuts, while Dunkirk's usually don't last for more than 5 seconds, unless the characters aren't in any danger, which in that case, like I said, there's no cuts. For me personally, the highlight of the film was actually the audio. Unfortunately, I did watch it on Blu-ray, so I didn't really get to experience it in IMAX like it was intended, but I swear, if some dude in like a robe walked up to me and was like, okay, here's the deal. You get to watch Dunkirk in IMAX, but you have to like roundhouse kick an infant. I mean, dude, I'm punting that baby to the moon. Hans Zimmer and Nolan had worked together like 100 million times before this, and I do think that this is their best work together. And it's not really that surprising to me that the best sound design from a Nolan film would be in a war film, but it is very surprising that Hans Zimmer's best score for a Nolan film would be in a war film. Dunkirk does not have my favorite music of any Nolan film. I just think it works best in the context of the film and is the most synergetic with it. And then of course there's the sound design, which, I mean, Nolan is kind of notorious for having amazing sound design, but for the characters' voices to be a little bit, the audio mixing not being great. And I'll admit, in this one, it's not great. There are quite a few times where I couldn't hear the characters super well, and I had to turn on subtitles. But it's not unbearable like it was in, say... Actually, this is probably the worst of it, actually. I haven't seen Tenet, though. I don't know if Tenet is worse than that, but the audio mixing is a little bit weird. But the sound design is incredible, and my favorite use of the sound design, as well as my favorite shot in the entire film, actually comes right at the beginning of the film. It's a close-up ground-level shot of Fionn Whitehead's head, like, kind of like he's covering himself because it's the bombing scene. And he only takes up like 1/3 of the screen, but the other 2/3 is the beach road, I guess you would call it. I don't know. It's showing beach, and you see the bombs go off. The first bomb goes off, boom, except you don't hear it. You just see it go off. Then the next one goes off, and then you hear the first one go off. And then you hear the second one go off, and it keeps on going like that until it gets like right as close as it possibly can to Fionn Whitehead's character. And it's brilliant. It's incredible. And because of the difference in distances of the bombs, because sound obviously travels faster than light, the sounds kind of overlap. So it's like complete quiet whenever the first one goes off, but then the second one is like insane because it's closer, meaning that the sound has to travel less distance than the first one. I mean, that shot, just in general, it's just the embodiment of good life choices. I will say the only character that I really found super interesting was Cillian Murphy as the shivering soldier. And the issue is, I feel like one of the main reasons why I found him so interesting was because he was played by Cillian Murphy, who's one of my favorite actors. However, I can look past that a little bit because of the fact that this is a war film. It's not typical of a Nolan film to not have a bunch of compelling characters, but it is typical of a war film. Overall, I was very impressed by Dunkirk. I'm very happy to say that it's a great entry in Nolan's filmography, and I'm very happy to call it his war film. As for where it would rank on my Christopher Nolan list, which by the way I am on Letterboxd, if you're interested, my username is Dallas Hunter. I put it at number 5, so above Interstellar, but below The Prestige. Now, if you excuse me, I have to go clean my Christopher Nolan shrine because I'm a filthy casual who likes Nolan, and so I don't care about cinema as much as you, I guess. I don't know.